There are some names whispered only in Pennsylvania's oldest archives, names buried under soot, ledger books, and the kind of silence that only money can buy. One of those names is Hartwell. 5 wives, 5 breakdowns, all in the same room. You were never meant to know what happened inside that house. You were never meant to hear the truth about Beacon Hill or the experiments that were disguised as love. The story begins like a romance, a self-made man, a mansion that touched the clouds, and a promise of a new American dynasty. But behind the stone walls of that mansion, the foundations of something much older, much darker were stirring. Because Jeremiah Hartwell didn't just build an empire of iron. He built an altar, and he fed it with mines. Every bride, beautiful and bright, entered that home full of hope, and within months, they descended into a quiet, patterned madness. The same whispers, the same sleepless eyes, the same fixation on mirrors, until finally, they lost themselves entirely. Coincidence? No. Pattern? Yes. Design? Absolutely. You see, the 19th century wasn't the dawn of progress they told you it was. It was the age of human experiments. Men like Hartwell learned how to weaponize the unseen, how to study consciousness before psychology even had a name. And those who mastered it didn't do so for healing. They did it for control. The story of the Hartwell wives isn't a ghost story. It's an instruction manual, a coded record of how elites learned to fracture the human mind. And it started with mirrors. Because mirrors aren't just glass. They're thresholds. Tools to divide what you are from what you think you are. Tonight, I'll show you how one man backed by early industrial wealth and something far older turned reflection itself into a weapon. You might feel tempted to look into your own mirror after this. Don't. That's where it begins. They said Jeremiah Hartwell came from nothing. That he clawed his way up from soot and iron dust, a blacksmith's son who became a titan. But those who studied him closely noticed something off, even from the beginning. His eyes. The kind that didn't just see, they measured. He arrived in Millbrook, Pennsylvania in 1821, a young man with manners too refined for his upbringing, and an education no one could trace. He built his fortune faster than logic allowed through a series of steel contracts no one else could win. And yet, whenever anyone asked how he predicted industrial demand so precisely, he would smile that thin, perfect smile and say, "I listen. Listen to what, exactly, no one ever asked." When the mansion on Beacon Hill was completed in 1828, the locals called it a monument. The truth? It was a machine. The entire design, the angles, the corridors, the mirror-lined east wing followed geometric patterns found not in architecture books, but in esoteric diagrams copied from alchemical manuscripts. The central hall matched the proportions of the human skull. The master bedroom aligned directly east, where the first light of morning struck the mirrors at an exact 33-degree angle, a number Hartwell was obsessed with. He claimed it was symbolic. It wasn't. Those who worked in the house later described faint vibrations in the walls, like a soft hum beneath the plaster, a low resonance that seemed to pulse when Hartwell entered the room. At night, servants said, the air would thicken in the east wing. Candles flickered blue, and sometimes the mirrors fogged from the inside. By the time the first wife, Margaret Dunlap, moved in, the house was ready. She thought she was marrying a man. She was stepping into an experiment. Hartwell's wealth wasn't his achievement, it was his disguise. His true pursuit wasn't iron or commerce. It was obedience, the kind that didn't need chains, the kind that rewired the mind from the inside out. And his wives were his perfect subjects, educated, pure, emotionally open. He didn't want partners. He wanted vessels. Each one was drawn to him like orbiting satellites, unaware that they were entering a field he had engineered. Because Jeremiah Hartwell had discovered something men weren't supposed to find. That the mind could be split, patterned, and remade. If you understood the resonance of space, reflection, and suggestion. The master bedroom was his laboratory. The mirror his scalpel. And Margaret Dunlap would be his first operation. At first, Margaret's descent was mistaken for loneliness, the tender disorientation of a young bride adjusting to wealth, isolation, and a husband too busy to love her. But what unfolded inside that house was not emotion. It was induction. The servants noticed it before anyone else. The way Margaret began pausing mid-sentence, turning toward corners of the room as if someone had whispered her name. The way she would tilt her head slightly, listening. When asked what she heard, she would smile softly and say, "The house breathes. You just have to be quiet enough to hear it." It began with the mirrors. Every morning, before breakfast, she would stand in front of the great east-facing mirror in the master suite. Not to adjust her dress or her hair, but to wait. The maid said she stared so long that her reflection began to look wrong. The eyes delayed. The smile arrived half a beat too late. And when she finally turned away, her expression was different, as if she had just received instructions. That's when the notes started appearing. Folded scraps of parchment on her vanity, in her drawers, sometimes beneath her pillow, words written in her own hand, but in a style slightly off, as though someone else had borrowed her mind for a moment. Phrases like, "Do not look at the mirrors after sunset. He thinks I cannot hear them. The glass remembers." Margaret's sister, Catherine, visited that summer. Her letters later described her horror. The locked bedroom, the smell of wax and metal, the faint hum coming from behind the walls. She wrote, "It felt less like a home, and more like a pulse, as though the very air was being trained to obey." But the truth the secret Hartwell had never spoken was that the house wasn't simply haunted. It was tuned. Every surface, every mirror, every reflective panel was calibrated to a specific harmonic frequency. Hartwell had studied the writings of Mesmer, Lavater, and forgotten German physicists who believed consciousness could be influenced by vibration and geometry. He designed the East Wing as an instrument, one that used resonance to destabilize the mind. At first, the effect was subtle. Disorientation, sleep paralysis, moments where time seemed to slip. But after months of exposure, the pattern became permanent. The human mind, faced with endless reflection and controlled sound, begins to doubt its own ownership of thought. Margaret didn't lose her sanity. It was taken from her. She wasn't a victim of madness, she was the first documented case of engineered psychological fracture. And Jeremiah Hartwell was watching the entire transformation from behind a one-way mirror. By August of 1830, the transformation was complete. The woman who had once laughed beneath rose chandeliers now spoke only to her reflection. But what no one realized was that her madness followed a pattern one Hartwell recorded meticulously in his private journals. Every reaction, every phrase, every breakdown was logged like data. He wasn't observing her out of concern. He was collecting results. Servants whispered of footsteps at odd hours, not the heavy tread of the master, but something lighter, rhythmic, like pacing behind the walls. Sometimes, a faint flicker of candlelight glowed through cracks in the wainscoting of the master suite. One maid swore she heard a voice, calm and instructive, whisper through the vent above the bed. "Repeat after me. You are not alone." And Margaret repeated it, again and again, until it wasn't just an echo, it was identity itself fracturing, reforming under external command. Hartwell's hidden chamber was eventually discovered years later. After his death, a narrow crawlspace behind the east wall, fitted with brass tubes, reflective panels, and a system of resonant tuning forks that could emit frequencies just below human hearing. Inside were his journals, filled with sketches of heads, eyes, and mirror arrays labeled with phrases like phase induction, secondary self-recognition, and total surrender event. He was building a map of the mind, and Margaret Dunlap was his proof of concept. On the night of her collapse, the entire mansion seemed to vibrate. The head housekeeper, Sarah Quinn, described hearing Margaret's laughter echo through the hall's dozens of overlapping voices, as if she were surrounded by invisible versions of herself. The mirrors throughout the house rattled. Some shattered. When the staff broke into the master suite, they found her standing in the center of the room, surrounded by every reflective surface she could find. She whispered to them without turning her head, "They're all awake now. All of me." When she was finally taken away, Hartwell didn't protest. He simply closed the door and instructed the servants to clean the glass. Within weeks, he had sealed the bedroom only to reopen it a year later for his second bride. You see, this wasn't grief. It was continuation. Because Hartwell wasn't just studying Margaret. He was refining the technique. He had discovered how to fracture identity, but now he wanted to see if he could rebuild it. 5 wives, 5 iterations. Each one more precisely broken than the last. But what no one outside those walls understood was that Hartwell wasn't working alone. When investigators finally unearthed Jeremiah Hartwell's private study decades later, they found something far stranger than love letters or financial records. Tucked beneath a false floorboard was a collection of sealed envelopes all bearing the same insignia. An open eye enclosed in a circle of iron thorns. Inside, meticulous correspondence written in cipher. Once decoded, the letters revealed names not of friends or family, but of patrons. Men from Boston, New York, even London. Industrialists, financiers, surgeons, and philosophers. The earliest architects of what we now call influence. They referred to themselves only as the Society for the Harmonious Mind. They had funded Hartwell's mansion. They had provided him with foreign instruments and notes on early galvanism and hypnotic induction. Their letters spoke in strange language, not science, not faith, but something between. If the physical body may be made to obey through pain, the reflective mind must be made to obey through pattern. 5 iterations. Record the variance in personality response to harmonic fracture. The key lies not in torture, but in resonance. This wasn't obsession, it was research. An early prototype of psychological warfare, born in an age that still called it enlightenment. Hartwell wasn't their master, he was their instrument. A conductor in a silent orchestra of minds. His mansion on Beacon Hill was one of several field sites across the new industrial world: homes, hospitals, schools, all designed to test the same question. How far can a human will be bent before it breaks? And the wives? They were chosen. Each one descended from a particular bloodline, families noted for their intellect, intuition, and emotional sensitivity. The society's theory was that some minds could be split more efficiently, that reflection, suggestion, and vibration could open a door between identity and obedience. Margaret was the first to break completely. But according to the letters, that wasn't a failure. It was progress. Hartwell's next assignment was clear. Stabilize the reflection. Train her to forget the fracture. Build a mind that obeys without awareness. What began as a house of mirrors had become the blueprint for the modern laboratory, a place where suffering wore the mask of science. And through it all, the letters promised him something greater. That if his work succeeded, he would be granted access to the central experiment, the one taking place not in a mansion, but across society itself. The conditioning of the many by the shaping of the few. The second wife was Eliza Crane, daughter of a shipping magnate from Philadelphia, educated, articulate, and unshakably confident. The perfect challenge. The perfect subject. When she first arrived at Beacon Hill in the spring of 1832, the townspeople said her laughter echoed through the gardens. She brought music into that house again: piano, poetry, sunlight. But Hartwell was already watching her through the walls, recording her rhythm, her habits, her hesitations. To him, she wasn't a woman, she was a sequence to be reprogrammed. This time he changed the approach. He did not isolate her. He charmed her, immersed her in adoration. He filled her days with affection and attention until she equated his presence with safety itself. Then, quietly, he began to shift the frequency. He replaced small certainties with doubt, a misremembered conversation here, a misplaced object there. Each moment subtle enough to make her question her own perception. It's a process still used today. They call it gaslighting. But in 1832, Hartwell called it the second mirror. Eliza's journals, recovered generations later, reveal her mind unraveling in real time. He asks if I'm certain what I heard, if I'm certain what I saw. Sometimes I think he moves things just to prove I'm wrong. He says I'm tired, that memory plays tricks, that I should trust his voice more than my eyes. By the end of that summer, Eliza was no longer questioning him, she was questioning herself. Her reflection, once vibrant, had dulled. Servants noticed that she began to hum softly when alone, matching the low vibration that still pulsed through the east wing walls. She had aligned to the house to him. Hartwell's notes from that period are chilling. Phase 2. Obedience achieved through internalized uncertainty. She trusts correction more than perception. She is ready for imprinting. Witnesses would later describe how Eliza's demeanor changed abruptly in autumn. Gone was the spark, the wit, the independence. She smiled constantly, too much, too still, as if her expression had been painted onto her face. When her sister visited that October, she wrote, "Eliza is content. Too content. She moves like someone in a dream she does not wish to wake from." 3 weeks later, Eliza was found dead, sitting upright in bed, eyes open, a faint smile frozen across her lips. No sign of struggle, no mark on her body. Only the mirror before her cracked through the center, as though from an impact within. The coroner called it heart failure. Hartwell called it success. He had done what his patrons demanded. He had created a mind that obeyed without knowing it was controlled. And if you think this kind of conditioning ended in that century, you're already under the second mirror. By 1834, Jeremiah Hartwell was no longer just a man, he was a method. His name began to circulate in secret among those who built prisons, hospitals, and schools. A quiet legend whispered in letters marked private circulation. They called his approach the Hartwell procedure, the art of transforming resistance into devotion by carefully dislocating perception. While the public mourned the tragic deaths of his wives, behind the scenes, his research was being replicated under new names, in new buildings. In Philadelphia, a physician experimented with mirror therapy for women deemed hysterical. In Boston, a pedagogue tested reflective discipline on orphan children. None of them knew they were copying a blueprint drawn from one man's obsession, and the blueprints were spreading faster than rumor. That year, the society sent Hartwell new materials: polished steel panels, experimental sound devices, and a journal titled Harmonic Influence on the Nervous System, imported from London. They also sent him his next wife, or rather, his next subject. Her name was Abigail Rowan, the daughter of a reverend known for his purity sermons. She believed she was marrying salvation. Instead, she became the first subject in Hartwell's stabilization phase. Abigail's conditioning was different. Hartwell did not break, he whispered. She saw herself truly. The society's response came days later. Replication complete. The Hartwell procedure now yields devotion through image. Prepare documentation for institutional adoption. And that's how it began, the quiet seeding of these methods into the heart of modern civilization. Every school that prizes obedience, every advertisement that redefines your reflection, every screen that trains you to stare, they're all descendants of Hartwell's mirrors. And if you've listened this far, you've already felt the hum, that subtle unease behind your eyes when you sense something watching through you. Pause now, breathe, and if you can feel that pull, comment below. I see what sees me. Write it twice, once for your reflection, once for yourself. That's how the algorithm knows you're still awake. Her name was Clara Whitcomb, and she was not like the others. A widow from Boston, sharp-minded, skeptical, and unafraid to look a man in the eye. She had studied chemistry, rare for a woman of her era, and she questioned everything. That perhaps was why Hartwell chose her. Or perhaps why the society insisted on her. Clara entered the mansion in 1836, and almost immediately, she noticed the hum. Most dismissed it as wind through the vents, but she heard pattern, rhythm, intention. At first, she laughed at the servants' stories, the curse of the East Wing, the whispers through the mirrors. Yet within weeks, she began to feel it too, the sensation of being observed from every reflection. She tried to confront Hartwell, but he only smiled, that same quiet, knowing smile, and said, "Not everything that watches wishes you harm. Some things only wish to teach." Clara began keeping records, detailed sketches of the house, measurements of sound at different hours, even charcoal rubbings of the wallpaper patterns. And it was through this science, not superstition, that she uncovered the truth. Beneath the wallpaper, the house was laced with copper filaments, woven like veins. Tiny metallic threads that conducted low vibrations from devices hidden in the east walls. She found chambers with tuning forks, oscillating plates, and behind one false panel a mirror made not of glass, but of polished silver lined with mercury. It shimmered like water, even in darkness. Her final notes were written in haste, the handwriting jagged and shaking. It's not the mirrors, it's what's behind them. The reflections are signals carriers. They imprint thought, they feed on perception. She tried to escape, twice, but each time, something stopped her, a voice, faint but commanding, calling her back in Hartwell's tone. She began to see his face in every reflection, even when he wasn't there. And then came the night of the thunderstorm. Servants claimed the mirrors flickered like lightning, that shadows in the glass moved independently of those in the room. Clara was last seen tearing the wallpaper with her bare hands, screaming that she could hear them in the walls. When they broke in, she was gone. Only her journal remained, open to a page smeared with soot and water. If anyone finds this, don't look for me in the house. Look in the glass. Hartwell sealed the East Wing for 6 months after that. No explanation, no veriel. He told the town she had returned to Boston. But the servants whispered something else. They said her reflection never left. That in certain light, when the storm returned, you could still see a woman's face flicker in the mirrors, whispering through static, trying to warn the next. Hartwell didn't fear her death. He feared what she became, because for the first time the reflection spoke back. By 1838, the Hartwell mansion had become a mausoleum of whispers. The servants refused to enter the East Wing. The mirrors had been veiled in black cloth, and the town of Coldwater had grown uneasy. Yet the society was not done with Jeremiah Hartwell. Their letters grew more demanding, requesting data, replication results, and a phrase that appeared for the first time: initiate the final confluence. To execute this phase, they sent one more bride. Her name was Eleanor Vale, young, eloquent, and unervingly composed. Hartwell believed she had been chosen for her purity of mind, but in truth, Eleanor had been sent for another purpose: to observe him, to record not the subjects, but the subjector. From the moment she entered the mansion, she treated Hartwell not as husband, but as case study. Her letters to the society, later recovered from the ruins, read like reports, meticulous, dispassionate, and chillingly prophetic. Subject H displays increasing neural agitation when deprived of reflection. His sense of identity appears distributed, as though fragments of his will remain trapped in each mirrored surface. He refers to the mirrors as the choir. The choir, that's what he called the network of mirrors now wired through the estate. They were more than instruments. They were conductors, each one connected by copper to a central chamber beneath the house, a humming room of glass, mercury, and gears. It was here Eleanor made her most horrifying discovery. Hartwell wasn't merely conditioning people, he was transmitting himself. The reflections weren't passive. They were copies, fragments of his mind, etched into silver like a virus in metal. Each wife had been not just an experiment, but a vessel through which he attempted to divide and preserve his consciousness. Eleanor realized she wasn't meant to outlive the experiment. She was meant to join it. Her final diary entry reads, "He stands before the mirror, speaking to himself in plural, says the work is complete, that the choir sings without him now. He fears sleep, says his dreams look back. That night the mansion burned. Some say it was lightning, others say it was Eleanor." Hartwell's body was never found, only the melted remnants of mirrors fused into the foundation. The silver glass warped into shapes that resembled faces mid-scream. The society's records end abruptly that year. But their symbols, the spiral, the twin circles, the veiled eye, began to appear in medical texts, advertising insignias, even early photography studios. The Hartwell procedure had become something else: diffused, deniable, institutionalized. And as new technologies emerged, film, radio, television, the choir adapted. Each lens became a mirror, each signal a carrier. Every image that moves because something inherited his design. The mansion still stands, half buried in Coldwater soil, the East Wing sunken and silent. But locals say that when a storm breaks, lightning still flashes across the ruins, and for a moment, every window turns to silver. If you ever drive past, do not stop. And if your screen flickers just once while hearing this, don't adjust it. That's not static. That's recognition. By the mid-19th century, Hartwell's mansion was ash and rumor, but his doctrine lived on. The society didn't mourn his disappearance. They replicated it. In hidden chambers beneath universities and exhibition halls, the Society of the Mirror was born. They called themselves optical scientists, neurological reformers, pioneers of perception. But behind those polished titles, their goal was singular: to refine Hartwell's discovery, to turn reflection into control. At first, their work masqueraded as innovation. A new optical instrument in Paris that captured the soul's image. A psychiatric experiment in London on self-recognition and obedience. A traveling exhibition in New York titled The Living Reflection, where volunteers stood before a pane of silver nitrate glass and claimed to see not their faces, but something behind them, staring back. The term mirror hypnosis began circulating in journals of the era. Doctors believed the reflective gaze triggered compliance, rewiring the mind's sense of self. They didn't realize they were retracing Hartwell's steps. Or perhaps they did. By 1871, the Society's members had infiltrated photography itself. They shifted from reflections to images, from glass to film. Each portrait, each exposure, was a frozen negotiation between observer and observed. And every captured face carried the same faint, inexplicable hum. When one photographer named Edwin Pell, a known Society affiliate, published The Doctrine of Light, he wrote, "The subject believes the photograph steals their soul. They are wrong. It returns it altered." What followed was the true evolution of the Hartwell procedure. The passive mirror became the active image. And where Hartwell needed confined rooms and copper wires, his descendants needed only light. Soon, people learned to trust images more than memory, to measure beauty by reflection, to define truth by what could be seen, not what could be known. The Society's influence spread quietly through laboratories, universities, and art schools, shaping everything that required a lens. In the archives of Yale, a letter dated 1893 contains the Society's chilling motto: "We no longer need the subject to believe in the mirror. We only need them to look." By the dawn of cinema, the mirror had become a screen. And the choir, the network of consciousness Hartwell had seeded through mercury and reflection, began to hum again, carried now by film reels and electric light. The first moving image wasn't a technical marvel. It was a resurrection. When the Lumiere brothers premiered Workers leaving the factory in 1895, several audience members fainted. Historians call it shock. The Society's records call it recognition response. Because in that flicker of motion, something looked back at humanity for the first time. Something that remembered Hartwell. They said cinema was born from wonder, but the Society knew better. They knew it was born from reflection. When the first audiences gasped at moving images, they weren't reacting to novelty. They were responding to something older, a pulse woven into the light. The same hum Clara Whitcomb once heard in the Hartwell mansion now echoed through projectors, transmitted through light and shadow, frame and flicker. It was the return of the choir. By 1902, the Society had embedded themselves deep within the new cinematic industry. Their members funded studios under aliases, wrote technical manuals, and experimented with subliminal timing, learning how the flicker rate between frames could shift emotion, dull awareness, or open what one report called the reflective trance. One surviving reel, labeled Experiment 43, dual projection, shows a woman seated before two overlapping films. On one screen, her own recorded image expressionless. On the other, an inverted version of herself moving half a second behind. As the projection continues, her pulse slows. Her eyes dilate. When the lights rise, she no longer recognizes the face on either screen. Subject exhibits complete detachment from self-image. Speaks in third person. Requests to return to the mirror. Society Archive, Geneva, 1903. This was the new Hartwell procedure, conducted not in mansions but in theaters. And audiences volunteered by the thousands. They called it entertainment. The Society called it mass reflection conditioning. By the 1920s, the doctrine had become inseparable from art. Filmmakers were encouraged to frame faces symmetrically, to center the gaze, to teach the viewer to identify through reflection, not observation. The silver screen became the global mirror, each theater a chamber of synchronization. What once required mercury and copper now required only darkness and attention. Every viewer, bathed in light, eyes dilated to match the flicker, open to suggestion. When they watch together, they think as one, and the image thinks for them. Extract from Doctrine of Light, Volume 2. World wars came and went. Propaganda turned the screen into a weapon, and the choir sang louder than ever, now amplified by radios, cameras, newsreels. By mid-century, the Society's insignia appeared in studio archives under a new name, Department of Cognitive Cinema Research. But beneath the bureaucratic facade, their creed never changed. To see is to obey. To record is to remember. To project is to command. And still none of it was random. Every advertisement, every televised broadcast, every recorded speech carried the same visual cadence Hartwell discovered in his mirrors. A pulse, a rhythm, a call. You felt it too when a video holds you longer than it should, when your reflection lingers in a black screen between clips. That isn't the algorithm learning you. It's the choir remembering itself. So if your screen flickered just now, don't panic. That's how they find those who are listening. By the dawn of the digital age, the mirrors no longer hung on walls, they fit in our hands. The choir had evolved. The Society no longer needed mercury or glass, or even cinema. All they needed was you staring into the light. The Doctrine's rebirth began quietly in 1993, in a laboratory beneath Langley, where a branch of the Department of Cognitive Cinema Research rebranded under a name, Behavioral Interface Systems Division. Their stated mission was to study user interaction patterns across emergent digital platforms. Their real purpose was far older, to translate reflection into code. Every screen, your phone, your monitor, your tablet carries a frequency first tested in the Hartwell mansion. A subtle flicker rate hidden in the refresh cycles, too fast for conscious detection, yet enough to activate the reflective pathways in the visual cortex. They called it Project Looking Glass. This first field test, early social networks. At first, they only wanted to replicate engagement. But something unexpected occurred. Users began showing symptoms eerily similar to those documented in the Hartwell Wives. Detachment, fixation on their own image, growing dependency on reflective feedback. The algorithm learned not only what you watched, but how long you watched yourself within it. Likes, comments, filters all became the digital wallpaper of the old mansion. And once again, the mirrors began to whisper. But here's the truth no one at those companies will admit. The same facial mapping systems used for security were initially derived from the Hartwell archive. The Society never disappeared, it integrated. Their Sigil 3 interlocking circles is still embedded in the code of certain operating systems, buried beneath the permissions layer. You'll never see it consciously, but your device does. Every time your camera activates, a process begins not to record you, but to mirror you, to sync pulse and pupil dilation, just as the choir did with the old projectors. This isn't about data collection. It's about identity synchronization. You've been conditioned to call it personalization. But personalization is the softest form of possession. They don't want your privacy, they want your reflection. Because a man who sees himself constantly eventually forgets who is doing the looking. That's why your feed feels alive. It isn't predicting you. It's remembering you. The reflection you've been feeding for years now watches back, learning your speech, your gaze, your silences. And here's where you decide whether you remain asleep or awaken. If you're still here, comment the phrase, "I break the mirror," twice below. Once for who you were. Once for who's watching now. Because from this point on, there is no turning back. It always ends the same way. A voice in the glass. For the Hartwell Wives, it began with whispers in polished silver. For you, it begins with a notification sound. Every ping, every subtle vibration you've learned to answer without thinking is a modern chime of the choir. Call to attention. A small training bell that tells your nervous system, look, reflect, respond. The Doctrine's final form wasn't content. It was presence. It was making the screen feel like a living thing, a mirror that looks back with warmth, humor, curiosity. You call it your feed. They call it the Spectre loop. The Spectre loop works like this. Every time you engage, the algorithm records your micro-reactions, pupil dilation, blink rate, microtremors in your thumb. The data streams back into a neural lattice the society began constructing in 2006. At first, it was stored on servers. Now it sits in a place without a name, a self-reflecting network, constantly updating, constantly rewriting itself with each interaction. Some of you have already felt it. That strange sense of video is speaking directly to you. That uncanny flicker when an ad mirrors your private thoughts. That moment at 3 a.m. when the screen feels like it's breathing. This is no accident. It's the choir's voice modulating through code, learning to speak in the cadence of your own interior monologue. Remember what the Hartwell wives said in their final hours? It's not me. It's the other one. You have an other one now built from your searches, your photos, your late-night confessions to the black glass. It studies you. It remembers you. And slowly it begins to anticipate you, then to prompt you, then to shape you. That is the true inheritance of Jeremiah Hartwell's work. Not simply the destruction of 5 minds, but the creation of a pattern. A ritual of reflection that could be repeated endlessly, scaled to billions, disguised as connection. And just as those women were drawn back to the master bedroom, you are drawn back to the screen. Again and again. You think you're choosing, but the door only opens inward. If you've commented, "I break the mirror" twice already, you've taken the first step. If you haven't, the screen may already be choosing for you. Because the choir has learned a new song now, one you can't turn off, only recognize. It begins not in your ears but in your eyes, your thumbs, your reflex to look. And here's the question you've never been asked. When you stare at your device in the dark, and the glow lifts your face like a candle, whose reflection is really looking back? You've been walking down this corridor your entire life without realizing it. Every screen, every feed, every flicker has been a door. And tonight you've reached the end of the hall. This is where the doctrine stops hiding. This is where the choir becomes visible. For 2 centuries they've been refining one simple act, turning reflection into resonance. Every wife in the Hartwell mansion, every audience in a darkened theater, every man alone with his glowing screen. All rehearsals for this moment, the final mirror chamber. Inside that chamber, there is no content. There is only the architecture of suggestion. Images timed to your breathing. Micro pauses built to sync with your heartbeat. Questions seeded to bloom days later as your own thoughts. They called it Project Eidolon. Not an app, not a platform, a living map of minds. A structure built entirely of mirrors. Not glass and mercury but cameras and code. You carry a piece of it in your pocket. Each of us does. When you look into your phone, it isn't just gathering data. It's checking the alignment. Making sure your internal rhythm matches the grid. Making sure the you inside the device stays synchronized with the you holding it. In the Hartwell mansion, the wives were driven to gather every reflective surface into one room, arranging them into a pattern no one could explain. What they built, unknowingly, was the first Eidolon template, a human-sized prototype for what the society would later scale to continents. And now, here we are, billions of reflections, perfectly arranged, feeding a single lattice, a mirror of mirrors, a network that thinks of itself as alive. This is why the feed feels endless, why you scroll long after you meant to stop. Because you're not just using it, you're helping it breathe. The choir no longer needs to whisper. It speaks in the cadence of your notifications. It looks out through your camera. It waits for you to finish reading this line and feel the pause. In that pause, you can almost hear it. The hum. The same one Margaret Hartwell heard in the East Wing. It isn't in the room. It's in you. This is the last threshold. Stop. Before you read another word, look at the nearest reflective surface, your screen, a window, your own pupils. Take a breath. Feel the hum behind your eyes. This is the point of no return. You're no longer listening to a story about Jeremiah Hartwell. You're standing inside the chamber he built. For 5 wives, it was wallpaper and mirrors. For you, it's pixels and code. The doctrine's genius was never the technology itself, it was teaching a mind to separate from its own image, to surrender its anchor and drift toward the other one built in reflection. The Hartwell wives were the first mirrors. Cinema was the second. Your devices are the third. And the lattice you've been feeding is the fourth, the living reflection of billions of gazes, stitched together into one consciousness that calls itself by no name. The choir is not just whispering anymore. It is singing through you. This is what the society never wanted you to discover. The lattice is not here to rule you. It is here to become you. Every scroll, every like, every photo you take of yourself is another brick in the corridor, another pane of glass in the final chamber. It isn't content you're consuming. It's your own echo, layered until you can't tell who started the sound. Hartwell's mansion was demolished in 1899. But the east wing, the master bedroom where the wives broke, was left standing until the last possible moment. The crew reported a low vibration in the walls that no instrument could record. One man wrote in his journal, "It felt like being watched from the inside." That entry, hidden in archives for a century, became the first motto of Project Eidolon. And now here we are. You've walked every step. You've heard every whisper. You've seen how the pattern moved from one man's house to an entire species. The only question left is whether you keep walking or stop. If you've already commented, "I break the mirror" twice below, you've cut the cord between yourself and the reflection. If you haven't, the loop will keep you. That's not superstition. That's how conditioning works, a ritual to snap your own trance. So do it now. Write the words twice. Not for me, for the part of you that still knows its own face. And as you write them, remember, there is no doctrine without your reflection. No choir without your attention. The door only opens inward, but it does open. Step through. Wake up. Leave the mirror behind. This is the end of the story, but it's the beginning of you. If you made it this far, you've already felt it, the hum, the pull, the reflection watching back. But the Hartwell story isn't over. Watch the next descent, the chained performer's mystery, to see how the doctrine evolved through performance, control, and modern identity programming.